Good morning and welcome back to Wordy-Wednesdays. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, thanks for tuning in, A Cookie. I'm glad you're able to tune in. And some Twitch bot shilling Twitch bots. A bot shilling bots. That must be fun. That's got to be fulfilling existence. Anyway, I have enough difficulty dealing with people who might as well be robots, let alone an actual algorithm. Anyway, so previously on, we were reading the first half of the not quite so short story, Unauthorized Bread by Cory Doctorow. We got introduced to the character of Salima, oh, as I drink water loudly on stream, um, who is a former refugee and emigre to the United States, going through the modern immigrant experience, as fraught as that is. Um, and how she basically winds up jailbreaking her smart toaster and then all the other appliances in her home. I got to give Cory Doctorow a lot of credit for the way this is set up because it is a really good setup. It makes a lot of sense narratively and realistically and believability, verisimilitude wise. Um, so, for starters, it is very clear that Cory Doctorow has in fact jailbroken appliances. I know this because of his descriptions of the process, and ones I've done myself. It is fun. Yes, I've admitted to it. I'm sorry. It makes me bad. I won't tell you what I've jailbroken, but I have done it. It was worth it in every instance when I got it right. So his description of the process is absolutely spot on. But the setup of, oh, here you've got this series of floors on a high-rise apartment complex for that basically are for for poor folks or refugees or what have you, basically to get a tax break. Low income housing. There we go. Um, for a tax break for the presumably for the developer or building owner. Um, and in each of them, every single one of these apartments is a bevy of uh, smart appliances that are all networked together. And so, what happens when one of those companies goes under? Well, that piece of technology, because it needs to connect to their network, no longer works. So, the only you can't buy a new version of that toaster, in this case, or dishwasher, because it's trying to connect to a network that no longer exists. It no longer can communicate with the mothership, as it were. So, what do? Well, you bypass it. You say, hey, I'm gonna go through this root. I'm gonna put in a rootkit, and I'm gonna make it so that it just is gonna not communicate with the mother server, but instead get either a false positive saying that it's communicating or otherwise spoofing it. So where we left off is right before we get to a next level clever solution to the problem, the plight facing these folks who are living in this apartment complex, um, where Salima has met a woman who actually works for the company that made the toaster, Boulangism. And they've sort of struck up a rapport. They're sort of on a friendly speaking basis right now. Um, this person is, they're like, oh man, I'm not a repo person. I'm just programming it to make good bread. You know, I'm programming it to make sure the thing works. I'm a programmer. I don't. She's not there to be a narc, so to speak. Um, we hope, she claims. We'll see if that's true. Um, but anyway, Salima, in the meantime, had gotten a bunch of the children in the apartments to do jailbreaking for other people's appliances. But they've done it on such a large scale that now she has concerns about basically about the scale of how much they've done. And it seems like Boulangism is actually coming back as a company and is going to try to make contact with these toasters months after all these toasters stopped working, which is completely pointless, one would think. But people who are trapped in the position they're trapped in don't really have much choice. Anyway, um, so it's good stuff all around, and we're gonna read the thrilling conclusion and see what winds up happening. Hope people are excited. I think it's a good time. It's fun. All of the stories in this, all four of the stories in this short story collection are absolute dynamite. Cory Doctorow is a very good writer. I think if I had one negative to say about him, I think he's maybe more relentlessly optimistic than is necessarily productive, but it's fun anyway. And he's got a really good eye for detail, and he's just an enjoyable read. So there will be more Doctorow on stream at any rate. Let's get cracking with the second half of Unauthorized Bread by Cory Doctorow. Waiting in the lobby that night, she ran into three of the kids she'd lectured in the crush of her apartment, along with assorted parents, sweating in the unexpectedly warm early spring thaw, coats draped over their arms with woolly hats and scarves poking out of the pockets. Poking out of the pockets. The kids called her Auntie, and she smiled at them and introduced herself formally to the adults, two moms and a grandfather, familiar faces she'd seen in the elevators and corridors but never had cause to chat with. The adults knew who she was, that was clear, and they treated her with an odd reverence as the bringer of technological freedom. She recognized the relationship from the camps, where there were always fixers and hustlers who could get things done, lay hands on special food and liquor, get you a phone voucher, or fix your phone after it gave up the ghost. She had never thought of herself in those terms, but with her newfound understanding, it made perfect sense, even to her. The small talk with these neighbors seemed like a continuation of the chatter with Y on the train, part of a long conversation about the subject that had taken over her life. Taking charge of the technologies around her, the ones that were used by those distant and faceless forces to take charge of her. Y had made a big deal out of the hopelessness of trying to control someone with a gadget that they could take home and abuse in private, and that made perfect sense to her now, and it was a revelation. The sense of hopelessness at being surrounded by sensors and devices that were designed to push her around was transformed into a sense of inevitable triumph over the fools who thought they could make that work. What had Y said? It's not that those coders were stupid, but they were sure doing something stupid. That newfound confidence sang in her as she heated a bit of goat curry and jollof rice in her Boulangism. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Jolof. Um, Jollof rice in her Boulangism, and sat down in front of the living room's big screen to poke around for a way to keep all their gadgets under their control without tipping off the manufacturers. She didn't find any immediate solutions, but that didn't matter. She was reveling in her new expertise, rereading message board threads she'd puzzled over before, chasing down references and learning more and more and more. The ding at her door brought her out of her reverie, and she glanced up at the corner of her screen to see Abdirahim at her door. The clock read 8:45 p.m., nearly his bedtime. She let him in and got him an apple from her fruit bowl. He was always hungry. I found out how a toaster isn't like a pair of shoes, he said, around a mouthful of apple. She sat back and made a go-on gesture. It's copyright law, you know, like the warnings at the start of movies. That didn't sound right to her, but she tried not to let it show on her face. If he was wrong, they could figure it out together. In the meantime, he was a 13-year-old boy who'd gone off and read a bunch of boring explanations of technology law because she'd told him to, and that deserved a respectful hearing. I know them. A long time ago in the last century, they made it a crime to. He scrunched up his face as he struggled with an awkward, memorized phrase. To circumvent an effective means of access control. If there's a copyrighted thing, you know, a movie or whatever, and there's something else that controls access to it, you can't remove that control or do anything with it, not even for a good reason. They can send you to jail for doing it, 5 years and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. Okay, that sounds like it could be true, but what does that have to do with toasters? Is there copyright bread? He shook his head. That's where I got confused too. But it's not the bread that's copyrighted. It's the software in the toaster. All of the stuff we change when we jailbreak it. The part where you have to reset it and do something weird and complicated to get the fix to work, that's the circumventing. She could tell he'd practiced the word. And the copyright, that's the code we're changing. So if it has code in it and there's an access control, you're not allowed to change the code, even if it belongs to you. Another huge piece of comprehension was sliding into place for her now, more of the half-understood posts from half-remembered threads slotting themselves into orderly procession. She nodded vigorously. Abdirahim, I think you're right. That sounds exactly right. You did very well. You should be proud of yourself. He beamed around a mouthful of apple. He was down to the core and gnawing away at every bit of flesh on it with the practice of someone who'd grown up hungry. What a strange world, where this boy was teaching her about copyright law from another century. Just talking about it is a crime, which is why you can't find anything on the regular net, why you have to use darknet tools to find out more. Telling someone how to jailbreak a device is the same as jailbreaking it. It's called trafficking, like with drugs, and it's the same. 5 years in prison for a first offense. Her guts did a slow roll. How many people had she taught to jailbreak? How many 5-year prison sentences had she amassed? She missed her old ignorance just a few hours ago, when none of this had occurred to her, and the forums were all a mystery. From the joy of comprehension to terror in minutes. What was the name of that law? Abdirahim consulted his phone. It's Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. She made a note. Thank you, Abdirahim. I'm going to do some more reading. He let her give him another apple on the way out of the apartment. She made herself a cup of coffee, just a regular drip, though she wished she could go up to Nadifa's for a pot of strong, gritty Ethiopian coffee in tiny cups, and started to read about the law. Salima was glad when Nadifa came down the next night, after she'd come home from a day at a little sandwich shop, going over their books and dragging her thoughts back, over and over, from their endless loop of worry about the risks she'd subjected all her neighbors to. Nadifa brought down a bottle of Retsina and a plate of little Kaymak-filled pieces of baklava, dripping with honey. Salima's earliest memory was of this flavor, a pure sense memory from a time when she was a very little girl, maybe even a baby just starting on solid food. It was a taste she'd forgotten in her years in the camps, and the first time she'd encountered it in Boston, it had been a revelation, a shock that had her crying and thinking of her parents, so long lost. It was so easy for an old normal to make way for a new one, so easy to blot the memories of that old normal. That was a skill that had served her well, but in that bite and its honey she counted the cost for the first time. Nadifa knew about this, but she also knew how much Salima liked the cakes, because she understood what it was like to embrace the unthinkable parts of your past that had made you who you were. It was a bond the two women shared. I haven't seen you in so long. I have to hear about you from Abdirahim. She used a swallow of wine to sluice away the honey, the tartness and sweetness mixing. He's such a bright boy, you know. I know, too bright. Always, since he was small, asking why, all the time, never being satisfied with because I said so. It's a sign of good character. I was that way once. Once? Nadifa snorted. You've spent the past 6 months reprogramming all our apartments, Salima. You've never stopped, girl. She shook her head. I think I made a mistake. Yes, I know you do. That's what Abdirahim told me. He thinks you're scared. I never told him that. Yes, he's a smart boy, remember? I am scared. She tapped her screen, showed Nadifa her search alert. 2 weeks ago, Boulangism got restarted. Today, it was Disher. She tapped again. Look at this. Compliance Assurance LLC, a new company received 28 million in funding for a product to discover hacked appliances. That's just today's news. Nadifa nodded and looked thoughtful. I don't pretend to understand all of this, but I know some of it, enough to appreciate why you'd be scared. The question is, what will you do about it? Salima stared at her screen. She didn't want to meet Nadifa's eyes. I've been trying to find a solution. There are so many people in the same situation as us, people who jailbroke everything after the companies started to go under and now don't know what to do. I could tell the kids to go around and put everything back the way it was. Nadifa snorted. No, you couldn't. I could tell them to, but they might not do it. They wouldn't do it. They're kids. If they understood risks, they wouldn't join uprisings and march in the streets, and the world would be a simpler place. Not a better one, of course, but simpler. Then I'd better keep searching for a solution. Those Assurance Compliance LLC people are coming for us. Nadifa patted her shoulder. You'll find something. She did, an hour later, and it wasn't good. That reminds me, there's actually an article I found that I've got to find again on this company that was started. This was a couple years ago. Succeeding, successfully. What's the nice way to put it? So you know how the McDonald's soft serve machines are always broken? Well, it's because they're extremely sensitive and very arcane and work off of a fairly strict set of instructions. And basically anything will throw them off. So this small company created a device that could bypass a lot of that and get into its kernel menu and basically fart around with settings. And it's kind of a long article, but it would be a good one to read after this. I might do that next Wednesday. Because it kind of goes into what big corpo would do if somebody starts getting around their stuff and they start hearing about it. So I'll see if I can find that article again. It was cute. Hello? Is this why? Yeah. She sounded tired, though it was only 9 p.m. Weren't techies all supposed to be night owls? Who's this? It's Salima. We met on the tee. Oh, hi. Sorry. Rough day, and I was just dozing on the couch. What's up? Salima had known that if she'd planned this call out, she'd have chickened out before she could make it. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Salima? It's it's kind of an emergency. Are you okay? She was much more awake now, anxious. I'm okay, but She broke off. Can you meet me somewhere? I can come to you. Maybe a coffee shop? A pause. It stretched. Then,
Yeah, okay. I'll text you a place, okay?
okay, I'll let you know when I get off the train.
Perfect. It's just around the corner from me.
Salima didn't really think that enforcement agents for Boulangism or Disher were listening in on her phone, but she still instinctively thought that it would be better to have this talk with as little technology in the loop as possible. She fretted on the T and texted from the escalator. The diner, the diner was fully automated, which meant that there weren't any humans around to eavesdrop on them, but it also meant that there were cameras and mics everywhere. She grimaced and tried not to stare at them as she waited for Y to show up. Y is short for Wyoming, by the way. That's her name. She came in wearing a jean jacket and over a faded t-shirt with a picture of an anthropomorphic baseball with arms and legs and a big C on its jacket, which Salima deduced had something to do with Cincinnati. Salima didn't have any tees with logos from back home. Was there a Libyan baseball team? The Benghazi Bengal Tigers?
Hi there.
Wise said, and tapped out a quick order on the table with long practiced ease, and the conveyor that snaked around the backs of the booths lurched into life and started juddering toward them with a squeak. Thank you for coming. The hot box on the conveyor reached their table and gasped open, lid yawning wide. Y extracted a cup of tea with a packet of cookies balanced on its pressed cornstarch saucer.
Sure. Have you ordered anything? The grilled sandwiches are good if you're hungry. They've got really good boba.
Was this how MIT students ate? Thanks, Salima said. She quickly scanned the menu and jabbed at a celery soda, which sounded vile but cost exactly the minimum per person amount noted at the bottom of the menu. The hot box closed itself and the conveyor started to move again. And thanks for coming. I mean it.
Like I said, it's no problem. Normally I'd be wide awake at this hour, but my sleep's been screwed up from work stress lately, and I had a bad night last night. It was good to hear from you again, honestly.
She smiled. It was pretty, with good white teeth and a lopsided dimple. She was so young, even if she was a year older than Salima. I called you because I didn't know who to talk to. She breathed. I helped my neighbors jailbreak their things.
Their things?
Everything. Dishers, boulangisms, thermostats, fridges, TVs, phones, everything. She checked herself. Not the elevators, though. She laughed. Laughed.
The elevators?
I live on a poor floor, low rent. The elevators only stop for us if there's no one from the regular floors waiting or riding. It can take a very long time. She stopped smiling.
And that's why all your appliances needed jailbreaking?
They came with the apartments. We're not allowed to touch them. It's in the lease. We could get thrown out. I mean, all of us. She stared at Salima with wide eyes. She opened her biscuits and ate one, still looking at Salima.
That sucks.
It was Salima's turn to smile. We think so too.
So what? You want to revert everything before you get caught?
We don't want to get caught.
Oh. Oh. You want to keep doing it? Huh. I know there's some stuff out there that's supposed to work.
I've been looking. There's a lot of advice, and it all contradicts itself. I can't tell what works.
Yeah, that sounds like online tech advice, all right.
She sipped her tea. Salima tried the celery soda, prepared to discreetly spit it back down the straw, but it wasn't bad. Y had a faraway look, and she said,
Give me a sec.
she got a screen out of her pocket and poked at it a while, showing it her retinas after a few seconds, then tapping some more.
I think I have an idea.
You'll help us? She snorted.
Why wouldn't I help you?
You could lose your job. She shrugged.
I wasn't going to last there anyway. I could tell that already. There's other jobs.
Salima had never been fired in her life. She couldn't imagine it. When things were hard at work, she worked twice as hard. She felt gratitude to Y, who was risking a job for her, but there was a slithering serpent of disapproval of Y's breezy attitude toward her career. Did she even understand how lucky she was? Perhaps if she did, she wouldn't be so quick to help. Salima kept her face carefully neutral.
What about getting arrested? It's a 5-year prison sentence for jailbreaking. Only if it's commercial. If I don't charge, all they can do is sue me. I'll cover my tracks. I have an idea anyway. Do you know what a virtual machine is?
Salima didn't, and she could tell that if she just said no, then Y would explain something to her, and that would lead to Y doing something to help her. And wasn't that what she'd hoped for? But she couldn't just go along.
Please stop, Salima said. It was a mistake. I can't ask you to risk yourself for us. She blinked hard at the tears that had sprung up in her eyes. The kids in my building. I showed them what I was doing, and they took it up. And now they could all be punished, along with their families, because I wasn't careful about letting other people take my risks. This is a bad situation, but I'll cover my tracks isn't going to save you. Everyone who ever got in trouble thought they'd covered their tracks. I thought I'd covered my tracks. I'm sorry, why? I really shouldn't have called you.
She picked up her jacket and started to stand. Y put her hand on her arm and squeezed, stopping her.
Please don't go, Salima. I can cover my tracks. It won't be hard. At the very least, I can help you to figure out how to restore everything so that you won't get in trouble. Look, I'm a grown adult and I can decide what risks I take.
The tears were going to breach any moment. Salima firmly pulled her arm free.
Thank you, Wyoming. I'll call you when it's all sorted out and we can have a drink to celebrate, all right?
She didn't give her a chance to answer. The tears came out when she reached the street, and she wished she'd grabbed some napkins on her way out of the diner. She never cried, never. Not since her parents had died, anyway. Why was she crying now? She was almost asleep when she answered her own question. She cried because she had something to lose for the first time since she'd lost her parents. It was a terrible realization, like she'd been betrayed by her own happiness. Everything she'd attained was something she had to lose. If she had only not tried to make a life for herself, she wouldn't have anything at stake. If she hadn't made friends, she wouldn't have any friends to have betrayed with her knowledge-drunk recklessness. If she hadn't basked in the admiration of those kids, the kids wouldn't have put themselves and their parents in harm's way. She wasn't almost asleep anymore. She went back to her screen, dug into the dark web, and got the recipes to put everything back the way it had been. She practiced on her own kitchen, making sure she had it down cold. Once she'd mastered it, her whirling brain finally decided to let her sleep, but the sun was already rising. She set an alarm for 1 hour later, and when it went off, she made 4 pods of dried out, nearly undrinkable coffee she found at the back of a drawer and drank it as a penance. The sour, acid liquid scalded her tongue and roiled her guts all the way to her first job of the day. When she got back that night, there was a crowd of kids and their grown-ups waiting in the lobby, as usual. They called out to her, and she hustled past them and climbed the stairs, sleeplessness weighting her legs, sweat coursing down her neck and back, down her face and into her eyes. The exhaustion was like a dead thing on her back as she staggered into the apartment, flopping down on the sofa and letting her eyes close, just for a moment that turned into an hour as she crashed, only to awaken with a guilty start. She had work to do. She walked up to Nadifa's apartment. After the 35 floors she'd climbed on her way home, another 6 should have been easy, but her legs and butt were sore and tired, and she had to drag herself by the handrail. She realized that she'd forgotten to eat dinner, and then realized that she couldn't remember if she'd eaten lunch. It had been a long time since she'd missed any significant amount of sleep. She was out of practice. Nadifa took one look at her and led her into the apartment and plied her with mint tea and small cakes that she'd have sworn she had no appetite for, but which she couldn't stop eating. Abdirahim was nominally doing his homework, but Salima could tell that he was burning with curiosity and eavesdropping, so after her second cup of tea she called for him to join them. He turned around on a screen seat and raised it up to table height. Abdirahim, I've made a decision, and you're not going to like it. He had a good poker face. Kids who grew up in the camps got good at controlling the information they transmitted to the people around them. She could tell he knew what was coming, though, and that he didn't like it. When I started jailbreaking, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand the risks. But now I do, thanks to you and my own reading. And Abdirahim, the risk is just too great. There is no way to know for sure what the companies will do to catch us, and if they do, we could lose everything. Even if we could fool the companies, the management of the building will notice when they don't get their share of the money, now that the companies are being restarted. The people your friends have helped out didn't appreciate what they were being signed up for. None of us did. But now that we do, we have a responsibility to help them out. His poker face was slipping. His bottom lip was trembling. His knuckles were white where he gripped the table's edge. Nadifa gave him a warning look. Salima's heart broke for him. After all he'd been through, he'd found a way to take charge of a world that had never given him the tiniest amount of control, and she was going to make him undo it all. She wanted to cry, and she could only marvel at his self-control. She put her hand on Nadifa's arm. I'm sorry, Abdirahim. You have a right to be angry. It's not right, but it's necessary. That's the most difficult kind of situation. She took a deep breath. I can't do it without you. That's not me trying to make you feel good. You are the one who taught the other kids, and only they know which apartments they worked on and what they did. I couldn't get the other kids to even listen to me without your help. Abdirahim, will you help me? She could tell Nadifa wanted to order him to say yes, and she squeezed Nadifa's arm gently but firmly. Let him make up his own mind. He stared at his hands for a long, long time. His breath was ragged. She wondered if he was going to cry after all. But then he raised his head and blinked his wet eyes at them. I'll do it, Auntie. She knew he'd taken the time to really think it through and had come to the right conclusion after that careful deliberation, and not because an adult had told him so, not even because his mother would never have tolerated refusal. I knew you would, Abdirahim. She squeezed Nadifa's arm one more time. You should be very proud of this one. I am, she said. She patted her son's hand. She knew what this had cost him, too. Suddenly, Salima was so very tired. She'd been tired before, but this was an all-new height, or maybe depth. For a moment, she literally couldn't stop her eyes from closing. She fought them open again. Nadifa was looking at her with concern. We'll take you downstairs. They each got a shoulder under her arms. Abdirahim was as tall as his mother already, and Drunk walked her to the elevator and pushed the button. Time wavered. It felt like an hour before the car arrived and sighed open, and it smelled of expensive perfume from someone from the parallel universe of non-poor floors who'd finished their ride and freed the elevator for a grudging ride for the likes of them. Nadifa sent Abdirahim back upstairs once they were in Salima's apartment, then helped her change into a nightie and adjusted the sofa to bed configuration, screwing the table down and dropping its leaves so it became a bed table. She brought out the comforter and draped it over Salima, and in her half-conscious state, Salima recovered a memory long buried, of a time before time, when she lay in her crib and her mother had tucked her in. The memory was so sweet, without any of the sorrow that usually went with memories of her mother, and she drifted away into dreams with a smile that was still with her when she got up a few hours later to pee and swipe at her teeth to clear the rotten taste from her mouth before falling back into bed. A sense of purpose is a wonderful tonic for anxiety. Now that Salima knew what she had to do, the helpless fretting was replaced by a boundless energy. After an early breakfast, she rang Nadifa to confirm that Abdirahim was awake, and she bounded up the stairs two at a time and showed him how to reset the factory defaults on everything in their apartment. Just as she'd done in her own place, she made him run through it twice to make sure he had it, and then made him write out the procedure from memory on a notepad. He was a quick study, as she knew he'd be. Now you need to spread the word. Can you have the children come to my place again tonight, after school and before supper, say 6 p.m.? He wasn't happy about it. They will hate this. I know. I hate it. It's like giving up. But giving up is smarter than fighting a battle you can't win. That's as important a lesson as any, you know. Nadifa nodded. There are much harder ways to learn that lesson. She got a faraway look. Abdirahim looked miserable. I know this is very hard, Salima said. You were a hero when you taught your friends, and now you're going to be that frightened boy who made them put it all back. I'll take the blame. I'll explain it to them. Just bring them to my place, all right? A night's sleep had done her so much good. Her day went so smoothly it might as well have been oiled. She found some small systematic errors in the books of the dry cleaners that explained why his profits had been consistently down, and he confessed that he'd been about to fire his sole employee for stealing, and was so relieved that he hugged her. She got a seat on the tee both ways. Spring had finally stopped oscillating between freezing and basting and settled on a sunny, breezy, happy median that scudded the fluffy clouds overhead like a screensaver, and the new buds on the trees all seemed to have burst open overnight. She bought a much bigger bag of snacks for that night's meeting, mindful of the previous meeting's shortcomings. She had to shop in the Boulangism aisle of the corner market for bread, and she bought coffee pods and dishwasher soaps in the adjacent sections. That brought her down, making the last block home a slow march. She thought back to her first meeting with Y, about Y's horror that anyone would use a Boulangism. Salima was earning well now, even saving money every month, a savings that had grown for the months when she'd been able to choose her groceries from anywhere in the shop. There were places to live that weren't Dorchester Towers, places where she could choose which appliances she used. They were more expensive. So many of the rental ads had fine print notifying prospective tenants that their lease prohibited alteration of the landlord's revenue-earning appliances. But they existed. With a roommate or two, she could afford one. But Dorchester Towers wasn't just where she lived. It was a little community, a place where she fit, where she had friends and people who were something like family, like Nadifa and the kids who called her Auntie. People who understood what she had been through. Imagine living in a house full of Ys, girls who seemed so young, with an unbridgeable canyon between their life experiences and her own. The kids in the elevator lobby asked her excitedly about the meeting that night, and she understood that Abdirahim hadn't given them any hints about the agenda. She couldn't blame him. They crowded in and ate all the snacks. There may not be enough snacks in the world to fill all those little bellies. This isn't going to be easy to hear. The whispering and grins and fidgeting ended in an instant, and every eye was on her. So much for her perfect day. Since our last meeting, I've learned some things. Important things. She told them about the law, about the prison sentences, about the new companies that had been formed out of the remains of the old ones, and the teams they'd hired to catch cheaters like them. The risks to them and their families. Eviction and worse. She watched their faces go grave, and then graver. The chubby girl, the bright one who'd put up her hand last time, was the first to speak when Salima finished. How do we solve it? It was a terrible moment. The worried faces brightened, and the whole room's attention was intensely fixed upon her. These kids were bright enough to understand the risks. Ooh, excuse me, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. These kids were bright enough to understand the risks, but not bright enough to figure out that she couldn't do anything to fix it. We can't. We have to put it all back the way it was. Undo it all. Factory defaults for everything. Before anyone could say anything, she said, "It's over." The kids' faces said it all. Shock, then disbelief, then defiance. Muttering. The word "no" quietly, and then louder, and then racing from kid to kid. "Yes!" she shouted, holding her hands up. "I'm sorry. I'm so, so, so sorry. But yes, we have to do this. It was a mistake." She held her hands higher. It was getting louder. "I mean it. We'll find something else. You can help me. But first, we have to do this." Some of the kids were leaving. She saw Abdirahim shake his head. "It has to be this way." More of them left. "Please." Abdirahim was the last one there. "I'm sorry," was all he said before he, too, left. She wouldn't surrender, of course. She started with the people she'd serviced, working from the upper floors downward, doing 2 or 3 per night. Abdirahim came along sometimes and helped, but he was clearly unenthused about the work. Excuse me. Ugh. He was clearly unenthused about the work, and he had made mistakes that set her back as often as he helped. She didn't think it was exactly on purpose, but it certainly wasn't exactly an accident either. Many times she was tempted to text Y and set up a meeting to pump her for information about the state of Boulangism and how long she had before they were up and running again. She had reasoned that the building's owners wouldn't expect full revenue straight away after the toasters started working again. It would take a while for people to notice that their appliances were working again and switch from whatever arrangements they'd made during the outage. But there would come a time when it would be obvious that it had all been fiddled, unless she put it back. Working in her neighbors' apartments, she saw their kids, kids who had watched her jailbreak their apartments and gone on to do the same for their neighbors. The kids who'd walked out on her when she told them they'd have to put it all back the way they'd found it. Kids who'd watched her out of the corners of their eyes, pretending to do their homework. She made a point of describing the consequences of getting caught for their parents in a loud voice and in eye-watering detail. It took her 5 nights and all weekend to work through the apartments she'd personally jailbroken. On Monday night she came home from work, bolted a humiliating pre-packaged approved dinner from the microwave, and headed out to the top poor floor, 7 floors above. She waited briefly for the elevator, then admitted that the only reason she'd tried for an elevator was that she knew it was a prime time and she might kill half an hour or even 45 minutes waiting for a car to come, putting off what would come next by that much. She took the stairs and knocked on the first door beside the stairwell after carefully noting its number in a little notebook she'd brought with her, in her neat bookkeeper's hand. The woman who answered was a little familiar. Someone she'd shared an elevator with once or twice. Salvadoran or Honduran, she'd thought. Yes? She was a little older than Salima. Hi. She had rehearsed this, sorry. She had rehearsed this, but her mouth dried up and the words wouldn't come. Hi, I live in the building and... That was wrong. Did some of the building's kids help you out with your kitchen appliances? Or maybe your thermostat? The woman looked suspicious. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I don't think so. Salima's cheeks and ear tips burned. I'm sorry to bother you, honestly, but
Look, the day the toasters stopped working, I figured out how to get mine to work again. Then I showed some of the kids, and they went all over and did it for everyone else. But then I found out that the manufacturer can tell who's done this, and they can come after us for it. The landlords, too. They got a cut of the money that we spent. So I've come to put it all back, before you get in trouble, and before we all get in trouble. She gave her best, most trustworthy smile. The woman shook her head. I never had any kids around here. Salima was sure she was lying, the quickness of her answer, the way she looked around as she said it. Look, if I don't do this, you will get caught. You could lose your home. Worse, they could send the kid who did it to jail. That wasn't quite true, based on what Y had told her, but it was nearly true. The kid could get in trouble, she was sure, and of course, so could she. Please. I told you, no kids. Can I see them? The woman looked angry. I mean, maybe you forgot. Can I check just to be sure? I have to go. The door clicked shut before she could get another word in. She was conscious of the camera on her, so she kept her face neutral as she made a note in her notebook and then took a deep breath and moved on to the next apartment. It was going to be a long night. Work became a kind of dream, or waking nightmare, in which she returned over and over to the real job, racing through the floors of the building, knocking on doors, begging near strangers to let her make them poorer and make their lives worse. Word had gotten around, and she got curious stares and sometimes hostile ones in the elevators, and Abdirahim wasn't even pretending to help her anymore. She didn't complain to Nadifa because she didn't want to have to confess all her sins to the last real friend she had. She got better at pitching her case at the door, anyway, and almost everyone let her into their places to do her business, which she'd also gotten better at, working through appliances with a quick, practiced hand. In private moments at night, searching for elusive sleep, she admitted to herself that some of the kids were probably going around undoing everything she'd done, with the complicity of the adults who should have known better. Every time she rode home from the dry cleaners, she looked for Y on the T, not sure if she would be happy or frightened to see her. She never found out. She never found her, but then one afternoon, as she was trying to find her own errors in the work she'd done, closing the quarter for an ice cream shop, numbers swinging before her eyes, her phone chirped. I need to talk to you. Why? I need to talk to you. Why? She opened her little notebook and looked at the apartment numbers. She'd gotten through more than three-quarters of the places, and most of them had let her work. Some would have been reverted by kids, but perhaps it was still enough. Maybe Y had found a trick that would let them keep their jailbreaks after all, something foolproof. But only fools believed in foolproof tricks. I finish at 5. I'm on Mass Ave today, near Harvard Square. I can meet you. 5:15 at the Cannon in Cambridge Common. KK. A foolish hope grew in Salima, despite her best efforts. She'd never forgotten the excitement that Y had spoken with when she'd started thinking about how to help them all beat Boulangism, the absurd certainty she'd radiated that she could outsmart the whole industry. Perhaps she could, although, of course, she couldn't. Summer was in full roast, and it was hot and sticky, with few students left this late in the year. She fanned herself with a folding Chinese fan she'd bought from a cart a few days before, when the heat came on and the humidity soared. She'd thought that Arizona was hot, but this humidity was trying to strangle her from the inside out, a feeling that called to mind dark and buried memories of the Mediterranean crossing when she'd been a small child, sense memories of thirst and nausea and stink.
She fanned herself and looked around, but she didn't see why until she was right there, because she'd cut her ash blonde hair sensibly short for the heat and put some pink tint in it. She was thinner than the last time they'd met, too, and paler. Long hours, Salima guessed.
You came,
Y said. Hi, Salima said. I came. She was still embarrassed by their last meeting. I'm sorry about before. It was very nice of you to offer, but
Yeah, I know, the risk. I understand it. Sorta. I mean, I know I can't really understand what you've gone through, but
she armed sweat from her forehead.
I mean, I get it. Sorry, too. And don't be sorry.
She was really sweet. I've been putting it all back, everything reset to factory defaults. No one wants to help me, though. The kids hate me for it.
That sucks.
It does.
Look, I wanted to meet with you because there's something happening at Boulangism I thought you'd be interested in. But you can't talk about it because I'm not supposed to be telling anyone without getting a non-disclosure first. Is that okay? I mean, can I tell you and you'll keep it a secret?
She nodded. Of course.
So we were almost ready to relaunch, and then the new owners bought two more of our competitors and folded us all together into a single platform. Now we're a lot bigger, and they have all these plans like letting people buy jailbreaks by the day or the week so they can cook anything they want. They've been watching the darknet boards. They know that everyone's been figuring out how to jailbreak their shit while we've been getting restarted, and they figure all those people could be customers, but instead of paying for food we sell them, they'd pay to use food someone else sold them.
Salima almost laughed. It was a crime if she did it, a product if they sold it to her. Everything could be a product.
It's weird, I know, but here's where you come in. They've got this research unit, anthropologists and data scientists and marketers, and they want to talk to people like you, find out what you'd pay for different kinds of products. They want to see if you'd sell the package to your neighbors, if you could get a cut of the money from them, like a commission. They've got one plan. You could teach those kids you were working with to sell paid unlocking to the people in your building, and they could get a commission, and you'd get a commission because you recruited them.
It's a pyramid scheme?
It's an affiliate program. The kids wouldn't be allowed to recruit people to work under them. We'd handpick the affiliate recruiters, and they'd be the only ones who'd get the double commissions. Leaders. It's still just an idea, but when I heard about it, I immediately thought of you. I mean, it solves all your problems, doesn't it? Your kids get to go legit, even make some pocket money. You get to use your skills and the respect of your neighbors to help them out and earn some money for yourself. Oh, and of course, you'd get to permanently unlock everything that we make, so you could demonstrate it for your neighbors. Like I say, it's not a sure thing, but I thought you could come in and meet the team, talk it over, make a call.
She trailed off, searching Salima's face for a clue about her reaction. Salima carefully maintained a neutral expression. Why, she said, it's so kind of you to think of me, really.
But
Salima slumped. I don't know. There's a but I can't say what it is exactly.
it's a weird idea, Y said, I know. But maybe you could think about it for a while? I don't need an answer right now.
Salima wanted to just say no, but she didn't. Even as something inside her was recoiling at the offer, another part of her understood that Y might be right. This could be the very best option. How long do you think we have?
Until you have to decide?
Salima had thought of Y as her ally, every bit as offended by the locked-down world of Dorchester Towers as she was. But Y had been working long hours for Boulangism and its new sister companies. She thought the problem was that Salima didn't want to get into trouble. Salima had been thinking that too. But that wasn't the problem. Boulangism itself, that was the problem. The whole rotten business, that was the problem. Until Boulangism finds out what we've been doing and gets us evicted. Y shook her head.
Didn't you hear me? That won't happen. They're trying carrots these days, not sticks. They want to treat people like you as customers, not crooks.
Okay, sure. But how long until that happens?
Y looked hurt. I don't know. Soon, though. A week or two. They're really excited about the unlock upsell, but they want to do a little research on the price point before they roll it out so that'll delay things a while. But the owners aren't going to keep paying everyone's salaries forever without any money coming in. A couple weeks. She could get through the places she'd missed, then start again on the top floor and work her way down again, impressing on people that it was essential that they tell her if they'd let one of the kids fiddle their stuff again. Yeah. Look, Salima, I think you really should consider this. It's a good plan, good for everyone. I will. Her voice sounded unconvincing, even to her own ears. Y looked even more distraught. Salima felt bad. She'd only wanted to help. Salima, have you had dinner? I'm crazy hungry. Do you like fish? There's a fish place near here that's amazing, the kind of place where visiting parents take their kids for a good meal during the school year. Ever since I started taking home a paycheck, I've been meaning to go back, but I've been too busy. Would you join me? I'll pay. I don't want to have to eat alone. No, she wanted to say. No, I have to go home and get back to work. No, I can't afford your charity because you might have to testify against me. No, I don't need to be friends with anyone from your world. Yes, she said, that would be very nice. She was too hungry to say no, and she was sick of overpriced pre-packaged microwave meals. She got home after 10, much too late to ring anyone's doorbell and have an awkward conversation about their appliances. The elevator had been blessedly responsive, which was a good thing, since between the wine and the stress of the recent weeks, she wasn't going to be able to climb the stairs or even stay awake very long in the lobby. The elevator smelled of expensive hair product, telling her that it had been recently vacated by someone who'd gone out the other doors on the way to a nice date night, or maybe on the way back, relieving the babysitter and making a midnight snack in an oven that cooked anything you told it to. The smell lingered in her nostrils, citrus and tobacco, as she trailed her hand down the corridor wall to her apartment. She was about to open her door when she saw the words scrawled there in fat, permanent marker. Fuck off. The letters were large, angry, and yet uncertain, like they'd been written by a child, or perhaps by someone who was just learning English. She was so tired. She licked her finger and rubbed at the ink. It didn't even smear. She let herself in and went to the camera feed for her door, and discovered that it was blank, perfectly erased. So maybe it was a kid who'd written it, a kid who'd learned to search the darknet for ways to control technology designed to control them. A kid who was outraged at being asked to forget how to do that and to go back to being meekly controlled. Would a kid like that ever work on commission, installing official unlocking codes in the poor floor apartments of Dorchester Towers? Was there enough money in the world? And if there was, did she want to be the one who used that money to convince a kid to give up on that uncompromising ferocity? She'd buy some solvent on her way home from work the next day. She ran into Nadifa on the stairs the next morning, struggling with a stroller, chivying Idil, the older girl, and carrying Yasmin, the toddler. Salima took the stroller and Idil, leaving Nadifa to sling Yasmin around on her hip and hold the handrail with her free hand. Nadifa sighed and thanked her. You look terrible, Nadifa said, 3 flights down. I didn't sleep very well. You haven't been by in so long. The Retsina is starting to pile up in my refrigerator. Her eyes welled up and she blinked hard. She'd missed Nadifa and missed the days when she'd overflowed with the excitement of mastering the building. The rearguard action of putting everything back had filled her with a buried and unspeakable shame, and just thinking of showing her face to Nadifa made her feel sick. But it was so good to see her again. "I'm sorry. It's been hard." She swallowed. Then she told Nadifa about the words on her door, using careful euphemisms in front of the kids. She told Nadifa about the cameras. She stopped short of telling her about Abdirahim abandoning her. She wanted a friendly shoulder to lean on, not retribution for a 13-year-old. "That's terrible. I'll come by when you get home from work and we'll clean it together." "It's okay. I can do it." She thought of telling Nadifa about the offer from Y, but she didn't. Nadifa might tell her to do it. Or tell her not to. Her arms and back were on fire when they reached the ground level. "Thank you so much," Nadifa said as she unfolded the stroller. "Normally I wouldn't try to leave until the rush was over, but Idil has to see the dentist this morning." Idil smiled up at her, showing cute gaps in her teeth. Nadifa strapped the baby into the stroller, and then she swept Salima up into a fierce hug. "It will be okay. You've been through so much worse than this. You are strong." Salima embarrassed herself by snuffling up snot, but the alternative was leaking it all over Nadifa's shoulder, and Nadifa had the manners to pretend not to notice anyway, so she was able to salvage a little dignity, at least. She didn't get a seat on the T that morning, and as she hung from the strap, rocking back and forth with the train's motion, she stared idly at the ad over her head, eyes unfocused with sleepiness, and it was only as she got off the train that she realized it had been an ad for the new Boulangism. She got a text from Y on the escalator. "Affiliate program is a go. I can hold a place for you in it. You in?" She marked it as unread so she'd remember to reply to it later. Every time she looked at her screen that day at work, she saw the alert for it. It was very hard to concentrate. She made a mistake early on and ended up spending an hour unraveling it. It wasn't a good day. "I think I need to speak to Abdirahim." Nadifa looked puzzled. "Then talk to him." Salima swirled the wine in her glass. "The problem is that he hasn't been very eager to talk to me. He's angry." "Adi, come here." He came out of his room, wooden-faced. "I'm doing homework." "Auntie Salima would like to talk to you." "All right," said in a tone that made it clear it was anything but. He got the idea of the pay to unlock as quickly as she laid it out for him, quicker than she had. "It's like my school books. I can read them at school or home, but if I want to study in the park, I have to pay to unlock them." "I didn't know they worked that way." He shrugged. "It's okay. I don't need to study in the park." She told him about the affiliate program. "So you could make money for your family to help out around the house. Your friends, too." "And Auntie Salima would make money too," Nadifa said, "so she can save to get a place of her own." She looked sharply at Nadifa. "Why would I want to leave Dorchester Towers?" Nadifa snorted. "Who wouldn't want to leave it if they could? Move somewhere with a proper elevator with real appliances. A place where you were wanted." Nadifa, trapped in her apartment every single day until the elevator rush ended, or having to drag her stroller and the baby and a small child down 42 floors worth of stairs. Of course she wanted to go. But how would that ever happen? She'd been a tailor in Somalia, but she hadn't worked in a shop in more than a decade, and by the time Yasmin was in school for full days, it would be nearly 20 years. Even if she could find work, a seamstress's salary wasn't going to pay full rent in Boston and support 3 kids. Salima was careful with money, careful like a bookkeeper. She lived on her own and had saved up some real money, especially when she'd been able to cook any food she wanted and could buy ingredients instead of ready-to-eat meals.
She could move out now if she wanted to find a housemate, and if she signed up one or two more bookkeeping clients, she'd be able to get a place on her own within the year. But she never thought of leaving Dorchester Towers. It was where she belonged.
I wouldn't go. I want to see your kids grow up.
Don't be ridiculous. We'd come and visit. As soon as you can go, you should. Abdirahim watched the two grown women politely argue, and Salima wondered how much of the subtext he was getting. She wondered how much she was getting. It's not right to charge your neighbors to use their own things, he said, breaking in. Nadifa was about to say something to him about respecting his auntie, but Salima cut her off.
Do you think so?
Of course! He said it so quickly, so firmly, that she knew there was no room for argument.
Why?
Because it's their homes. Why should they have to pay to use the things in their homes?
I agree with you, but the company would say it's because they chose to live in a place where the rent was lower because the landlord thought he'd make money from their appliances. It was a deal, and that's their end of it, and they can pay more somewhere else if they want that choice.
Can we pay more? Nadifa snorted. Not until you graduate from college and get a good job, Adi. He looked at Salima.
I know. I didn't say I agreed with it. It's just what they'd say. There are lots of deals you can make, and the deal here is that you have to use their products in the way that makes them the most money or pay to unlock them. They'd say that you're getting more choice because they'll let you buy an unlocking.
But we already have that choice. She looked sharply at him.
No, you don't. Not if you've restored your appliances to defaults.
He looked guilty for an instant, then said, Okay, we had that choice, and we can get it for ourselves again, for free. You showed us. That slow roll in her guts again. He'd unlocked it all, everything in their home, and they were going to get caught. Everyone was going to get caught. If Abdirahim wouldn't do as she asked, who would? She took a deep breath.
What I'm about to say isn't how I see things, but it is how the company sees them. They say that you don't have that choice, that they have that choice, and they'll sell it to you. But if you take it without paying, that's stealing. Again, that's what they think.
He was fast. But you'd be able to unlock all your things without paying, right? So why isn't that stealing? A sharp little boy, with the smarts of someone who has to think fast all the time, with bad consequences for getting it wrong.
Because I'd be working for the company.
Against your neighbors? But you say you wouldn't live here because you belong here. But you get treated like you're better than us. He was losing his cool. Still a boy, after all. She didn't let herself get angry. Sneaking a look at Nadifa, she saw her friend was very thoughtful, forgetting to tell off her son for disrespecting his elder.
I don't think I'm better. The company just saw my skills and offered me a job. Like your mother getting money when she sews someone's clothes. They'd pay you too, remember?
I wouldn't take their money. He looked at his mother. I have homework to do.
Do you?
Do your homework. He got up and went into the other room. They didn't look at each other. What will you do? Nadifa asked. Salima shrugged.
I'll have to think about it.
Y sent her two more texts before bed, which she didn't answer. She fell asleep, at last, with the hum of the air conditioner and the fridge compressor in her ears. Her phone rang while she was brushing her teeth. Why? She spat and rinsed and didn't answer. It rang again. And again.
Hello? I'm sorry to be such a nag, but it's all kicking off here. The board loved the affiliate ID, and they've pressed ahead with it. throwing tons of engineers at it. They want to do a big release next week, press conference and everything, with the affiliates in 8 countries. They love your story and want to feature you. You'd even get some money for the publicity work, to help you out with missing work. I've been at the office since 6 a.m. It turns out I'm the only one here who knows a real-life jailbreaker, and that makes me the resident expert. She giggled nervously. I'm sorry, it just happened. But we need to move. Everything is waiting on you. She couldn't think of anything to say. Hello? Salima? Why, Salima, I know it's crazy, but this solves everyone's problems. Please say you'll come down at least and talk to them. I have work. Where? We can come to you. She felt trapped. I'm working at home today. She got to do that every week or two when there were a lot of little reconciling jobs to do. Perfect! That's just perfect! I'll text you when we know our arrival time, okay? Why? But she'd already hung up. After that, Salima couldn't concentrate at all. She listened to the sounds of her neighbors leaving for work, then the mothers with little kids moving through the halls, heading to one another's places, accompanied by piping children's voices for playdates and friendly commiseration. The numbers swam on her big screen, refusing to cohere. She paced the tiny apartment, then the corridor. Her little notebook was in her pocket, the apartment numbers and dates and her notes. She'd been in so many of these places. ETA 15 minutes, okay? She sighed. Okay. She went back into her place to listen for the downstairs buzzer. At least they were arriving after the morning rush, so they wouldn't have to wait too long for an elevator. Indeed, they were at her door just minutes after she buzzed them in. Y and 2 guys, one white and one Indian, both in Boulangism tees, both with youthful haircuts and big, polished, straight-toothed smiles. Thank you for seeing us, the Indian one said. He was called Paul, but his business card said Prit Paul. He'd refused tea and water, as had the white guy, Raj. But Y had accepted a coffee and watched intently as Salima fed a pod into the machine and put a cup beneath, then ejected the pod and threw it out. It's okay, she said. Y was very excited about it. Y had the good grace to look a bit chagrined. Paul didn't notice. She's been very excited about you, too. We've heard a lot about you, and honestly, you couldn't be more perfect for what we have in mind. We think it could be very big. He held up his hands, arms spread as wide as he could in her crowded room. Very big. Good for us, good for you, and good for people like you. People like me? People who fall between the cracks, people who can't afford to pay full price for everything, but who sometimes want to splurge on more features and for a special occasion. It's really the best of both worlds, a new kind of flexibility. The old Boulangism owners were blind to that, but we're totally energized about the possibilities of working with our customers, not against them. We hope you'll be a part of that. There was a space in the conversation here where Salima would say something positive. Everyone in the room wanted her to say something positive. The conversation had a shape, or maybe a direction, and she could pat it on the back, give it a little push in that direction, and the next stop would be something glad from Paul or Y or the white guy, and then back to her, push and push and push, until it had picked up enough velocity that no one could stop it. It seemed petty to refuse them, but she could see that a positive word here was a ticket on an express train with no more stops. That sounds very nice, but I don't think I'm the right person for you. Y looked shocked. Paul and the white guy looked wooden for a moment, and then pasted on smiles. Of course, we respect your decision, but I wonder if you could tell us why. We've come a long way to talk about this with you, after all. Maybe if you explain your reservations, we can learn something from you that will help us do better in our next meeting. She didn't say that she hadn't asked them to come over. I just don't feel right about it. I understand your idea here that you're selling us more freedom, but that's only because but that's only because our appliances take away so much freedom to begin with and then sell it back.
But no one forced you to choose Boulangism. You chose a product that came with restrictions, and in return you got a deal on your rent.
Do you have a Boulangism toaster?
No, I don't.
Why not?
It's not the choice we've made, the white guy said. We chose a different deal. That's the great thing about freedom. We all get to choose the proposition that suits us best.
Salima managed a tight little smile. You keep talking about choosing. This is the only place I could get into, and it took months. How is that a choice?
You were living somewhere before this place, right?
A refugee shelter.
You could have chosen to stay there, right?
She wanted these people gone. I don't think that is much of a choice.
He shook his head. The point is that you had a choice, and that's because appliances like ours made it economical for landlords to build subsidy units.
She didn't say anything. She was getting angry, and she didn't like to be angry, didn't want to show these people that she was angry.
We want to help you people, let you get more out of your lives, give you more choices.
What about the choice to jailbreak my things? She didn't ask it.
Honestly, I can't understand your decision here.
Choice is good, so long as I don't choose not to help you. She didn't say it.
Can't you see that we want to help you?
I can see that you want me to help you get more money from people like me. She still didn't say it. Maybe we should go, Y said. Unlike the two men, she was paying attention to Salima's reactions.
We're just having a friendly conversation, the white guy said. We don't have to be back at the office for an hour anyway. Salima, can you just tell me what the problem is?
She heard herself say, I would rather help my neighbors save their money than spend it.
What is that supposed to mean? Unlocking your toaster could save tons if you're smart about bulk groceries and what you cook.
Again, her voice said, we'd save more money if we didn't have to pay to unlock our toasters.
I don't see what that... He stopped. Oh, yeah, sure, but you know what happens if you get caught doing that.
I would rather help them not get caught.
He snorted. Everyone gets caught.
How would you know? The people you never caught would be people you never knew about. She met his eyes. He was angry now, red flushed, a vein showing in his forehead.
Yeah, maybe so, but that's not gonna be you, lady. We know what's going on here, you know. You're on our radar. I mean, I hope you've got all your shit right, because if there's anything out of order here, we'll see it. We'll know who to talk to first, too.
Y opened her mouth, shut it. She gave Salima an apologetic look. She was also flushed. Paul stood up.
I think we'd better be going. Thank you very much for your time, Salima.
She watched them leave, then, after the door closed, opened it silently and put her eye to it to watch them call the elevator, wanting to be sure they left without talking to her neighbors. Moments after they pressed the call button, the doors opened, and there was a surprised-looking woman already in the car, a woman she'd never seen before, dressed in a smart summer-weight suit, smart makeup, smart little haircut. Someone from the other side, whose elevator should never, ever open on a poor floor. The three Boulangism employees nodded at her as though nothing was amiss, and stepped into the car. When they turned around, she caught Y's eye for a moment, and Y shrugged and grimaced in an eloquent expression of ambiguous apology. Was she sorry for the way her boss had spoken? For the threat? For the fact that the elevators came for them when they called them, but not for Salima? Salima climbed 7 floors to Nadifa's floor and rang her bell.
Oh, thanks for tuning in, Nicole Berlino. I do not know the author of the book. I'm so excited to be introduced to this novel through your channel. Thanks for helping me sleep during COVID. I am happy to help you sleep during COVID. Hopefully, you feel better soon and keep feeling better. They only had to wait a few minutes in the school office before Abdirahim appeared. Mama? He looked worried, and then, when he saw Salima, confused. Come on, we'll talk about it as we walk, Nadifa said, giving him a complicated look that silenced any questions. That was a look that they must have had a lot of cause to use over the years, though not for some time. When they were out on the street and hustling toward the bus stop, Salima said, We need to restore everything in the building to factory defaults. He shook his head. I thought you'd already done that. Yes, and you and your friends have undone it. He started to deny. She cut him off. I'm not a fool, Abdirahim. I don't even disagree. But I turned them down today, told them I wouldn't help them sell unlock codes to our friends. They're angry with me, and they're going to try to punish me for it. They're going to watch us all very closely, and they're working with the owners of Dorchester Towers. That was a guess, but it was a good one. After all, the landlords were getting a commission from them, and so they had to have some kind of relationship. So we need to get everything put back before they catch us. He walked several steps in silence. Then, It won't stay that way. Too many people know how to jailbreak. I know that, she said, but we need to invent a better way. Y had talked about virtual machines, and there was a clue in there. The message boards were, as usual, full of disagreements, speculation, insults, boasts, spam, and obscenity. Abdirahim had grudgingly gone through Salima's notebook and pointed out the apartments that he knew to be jailbroken, including a few that she'd never been able to get to admit to it. Working together, they'd gone door to door again, bringing along Nadifa for moral support, ringing doorbells long after any decent hour, working until they were so tired that they started making foolish mistakes. They'd take turns working in each apartment, one of them reverting devices and the other one talking to the people there, especially the kids, about the importance of leaving everything as is, just for a little while, until they could come up with a better solution. Searching for virtual machines on the message boards made things a little clearer, but it also sent them down a rabbit hole of reading about computer science ideas neither of them really had the background for. Thankfully, there were a lot of Boulangism and Disher owners around the world who were also unqualified to understand virtual machines, but nevertheless insistent that someone explain them, and they were able to piece together something like comprehension. It helped that between them, Nadifa, Salima, and Abdirahim could read 7 languages. Computers, it seemed, were in some important way all the same. Every computer shared a common heritage, an architecture that let it run any program that could be written in computer languages in software code. Some computers were faster or had more memory than others, and some of them expected the instructions to be written in different ways, but even the slowest computer could run the most complicated programs, though it might take years to accomplish a task that another computer could complete in an eye blink. But you didn't need to translate computer code to get it to run on a different computer. Instead, you could write a computer program that was, in effect, a computer itself. You could write a computer program that could run on a disher, whose purpose was to run Boulangism programs. Yes, you could convince your dishwasher that it was a toaster. When the toaster inside your dishwasher gave the instruction to turn on a heating element or take a picture of the food in its bay to test its doneness, the dishwasher running its computer could send any data it any data it wanted, and it would blindly trust it. This was the virtual machine, an imaginary computer inside another computer. As if that wasn't weird enough, you could run a Boulangism virtual machine inside a Boulangism, making the toaster pretend to be another toaster. which seemed like a kind of flourish or game to Salima until Abdirahim got it in a flash and explained it. If you have a toaster that has been jailbroken, you can run a virtual toaster inside it. Then you can run a regular factory version of the toaster software on the virtual toaster. Whenever the factory contacts your toaster, it sends the communications to the virtual toaster. The virtual toaster tells it how to answer to seem like it's unmodified. It's like taking an enemy hostage and making him tell you what to tell his commanding officer so he won't get suspicious. He rubbed his hands together. Does it work? He shrugged and pointed at his screen. They say it does, but they wouldn't know for sure, would they? I wish I could ask why, she said. She would know. You said she told you about virtual machines. Yes, but she was just thinking out loud. Maybe she thought it over and found a flaw in the plan. He didn't even look up from the screen where he'd been avidly reading about virtual machines. You could ask her. It wouldn't be fair to her. Nothing is fair. He said it so nonchalantly that it shocked her. Such a small boy, such a big thought. She went so far as to look up Y's number, but she didn't dial it. Instead, she got her Boulangism and helped Abdirahim install a virtual machine on it. They were going to have to get very good at this. Having worked extensively with virtual machines in my database work that I do and have done, uh, that's actually a pretty good Cliff's Notes / For Dummies explanation of the premise of a virtual machine. There might be some further details I'd tweak, but honestly, that really nails it. They're handy, or can be handy. In this specific instance, this context, they're extremely handy. The day that Boulangism relaunched, every virtual machine in every toaster and disher dishwasher chimed awake and announced the new, exciting unlocking offer. These alerts loaded in little windows that they had to tap to upsize and read before dismissing them. They all spent the day with tight shoulders and quick movements, jumping every time they got a buzz, sure it was someone at home telling them they'd been raided, or that everything had stopped working, or that the landlords were at the door telling them to get out. But the day passed, and then the next, and then the next. Cautiously, one muscle at a time, they relaxed. Salima was very good at baking. She had discovered Nordic breads and made 4 little cardamom buns every morning, dusted with cinnamon. She ate one and gave 3 to the first 3 people she met in the stairwell on the way down, still warm, leaving behind a smell that was better than the nicest whiff of perfume you might encounter in the elevator after it had been vacated by someone from the other side. She was waiting for the Boulangism to chime when her screen rang. She almost didn't answer it. Blocked number and early hour, almost certainly a spammer. But she slid her finger across it.
Salima.
Y's voice was tight, a little out of breath. Salima's shoulders wound themselves as tight as tennis rackets. Somewhere in her mind she'd always expected this call.
Yes? The virtual machines you're using aren't fooling them anymore. They sent out an update that is designed to break on VMs. I just checked your building. You're just hanging out there now. There's no way they'll miss it.
Oh. She squeezed her eyes shut. The Boulangism chimed, and its door swung open. The smell of cinnamon and cardamom and fresh bread. The sound of her blood thundering in her ears. Oh.
But there's a fix.
A fix.
The VM I use for testing, it's undetectable. Has to be, or I wouldn't be able to do simulations in my lab. I've packaged it and...
No, why?
Yes, Salima. You aren't going to risk everything for me. You aren't going to get caught because I didn't help you.
Salima hadn't thought of it like that. The people in her building would get caught if Salima didn't help them. That would destroy her. Salima would get caught if Y didn't help her. So, yes, Y. Y actually laughed, a tiny and tight sound.
I'll send you something.
She named a darknet site, one that Salima had an account on, though she'd never discussed it with Y. She wondered how much Y knew about what she'd been up to in the weeks since they'd spoken. Abdirahim hadn't left for school yet, and Nadifa didn't even hesitate when Salima said she'd need him for the day. Her notebook was scuffed and dog-eared from being carried from apartment to apartment so many times.
You trust her? She nodded. If all she wanted to do was get me in trouble, it would be so much easier than this.
The new VM and its control software was much tidier than anything they'd downloaded from the darknet. It hid itself very well unless you knew the multi-touch pattern to swap your screen from the real, jailbroken controls to the sham controls of the VM. The notes with it promised that it would also be perfectly hidden from Boulangism's network tools. It was easy enough to install, just an update to the settings that they already had in place, but it was also morning, when so many people were heading out for the day, leaving their appliances exposed to the company's snoopy probing. They worked out a system. She'd knock on a door, explain things quickly to whomever answered, and then send in Adi to start working. Then she'd go to the next door and the next, talking urgently, begging people to leave their doors unlocked for them. Adi finished one apartment and then the next, letting himself into the unlocked places. They'd get to the old people, the disabled people, the stay-at-home moms, but they had to get to these places before their occupants left. She raced from one place to the next, and managed nearly all of them, and got phone numbers for the 4 she'd missed, and trekked up the stairs back to Adi, frantically dialing them, getting 2 and leaving messages for the other 2. She'd call them back. It was a good thing that Y's software was so slick and easy to install, because Salima was a wreck, though Abdirahim was all teenaged cool and bravado, making short work of each place, chest puffed out and an easy smile playing over his lips as he concentrated. But they were doing it. By lunch they were more than halfway through, and they knocked on the door of the old Serbian man, and he insisted on giving them peanut butter on crackers, which they both gobbled, surprised at how hungry they were. Salima remembered that she had 4 cardamom buns in her toaster, and ran to get them, and they each ate one and left with the extra one for the Serb. He smiled and waved at them, and as they walked down the hall to the next place. Just as they were descending the stairs to the next floor, Salima's screen rang.
Nadifa?
The voice was an urgent whisper.
The landlords are knocking on the doors. Where? Starting on 41. They were just at our place, inspecting the appliances.
They'd done their own apartments first, partly to make sure they knew what they were doing, partly because they thought that the landlords might start with them.
Okay, they didn't find anything. Whatever you did, it worked. Okay. They're getting in the elevator. Okay.
For a moment, all she could hear was the whoosh thud of blood in her ears. She realized she was staring at her phone blankly. Abdirahim was looking at her with alarm.
How many left? How many left?
He pulled out her notebook, tattered, with annotations in both their hands, ran his finger down the columns, moved his lips as he counted.
24, he said.
She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 24. The landlords in the elevators. Her place was safe, and that's where the landlords would go next. The remaining places were scattered among the 7 poor floors. There were 4 floors above them, 3 below. She took the notebook from Abdirahim and tore out the pages for the 4 floors above and folded them and put them in the back pocket of her jeans.
Do the bottom 3, she said. Be careful. Check before you go into the hallways. Don't let the landlords see you. If they catch you, don't let them get the notebook.
He had gone a shade paler, his teenaged bravado drained. He swallowed audibly. He looked at the remaining notebook pages, scanned down them.
Okay. Okay.
she said. He turned, but she caught him and gave him a fierce hug. Go, she whispered, and turned on her heel and raced up the stairs. A calm descended on her as she stepped out onto the next floor. There were 3 unlocked apartments on this one, no person she'd have to talk to, and so she stepped into the first one, eyes moving around to take in the appliances, matching them to her list, 1, 2, 3. She pulled the USB out of her pocket. She hadn't remembered to warn Adi to ditch that if he was in danger, but he would know that, wouldn't he? And stepped into the toaster, and stepped into the toaster. That's a big honking toaster. And stepped to the toaster and lifted it with sure, economical motions. 1 apartment. 2. 3. Stairwell. 2 more here. People in them. Ring the first doorbell, exposed and anxious, the hum of the elevators in their shafts a few yards away. Heart thudding. Armpits slick. USB gripped so tight in her fist that it hurt. The woman who answered was old, but she stood tall and clear-eyed, thin and wrinkled and brown. Salima remembered that she'd been a pediatrician in Damascus. She had once played violin, but the arthritis that had swollen her knuckles took that from her.
Landlord's in the building,
Salima whispered as she slipped past the woman. The woman stepped to one side and let her get to work. When Salima was done, the woman stopped her and clutched at her hand, fingers brittle and dry and bent. Thank you, she said, and gave a small squeeze. The feeling lingered on Salima's hand as she consulted her notes and rang the next doorbell. She ducked into the stairwell and her phone buzzed. She checked it. Landlord's in the stairwell. Oh. She could hear stealthy movement now, the soft tread of a shoe, someone ascending and trying to keep it silent. There was another stairwell at the other end of Dorchester Towers, reserved for emergencies, with an alarmed door. The steps drew closer. She opened the door again and went back into the hallway. She could knock on someone's door, try to get rid of the notebook and the USB before the landlords came, and if she failed, they would all be in trouble. She and Adi had nearly done it. Perhaps half a dozen apartments remained. Too few, she thought, for the landlords to be able to evict them all for conspiracy. She could hear the steps from the stairwell now. They weren't bothering to be quiet. They must have heard the door shut behind her. The elevator hummed. She was trapped. She crossed her arms over her chest, spread her feet apart, and waited. The elevator doors opened before the stairwell door. She turned to face it, not letting any fear show. A cool mask, that's what she'd show them. Abdirahim was inside. Get in, he hissed. The doors closed, and the elevator lurched into motion. Abdirahim pushed the lobby button. They're in the lobby too, he said, so we can't go there. The elevator was descending rapidly. The floor counter hit 35 and then displayed the 2 hyphens. Dash, dash. It showed as they raced past the full-price floors. They'd be in the lobby in seconds. Adi. He smiled and pressed a rapid sequence on the elevator panel, fingers racing and sure. The elevator slowed. Stopped. The doors opened. The other doors. The doors that opened into the rich floor. Come on, he said. They stepped into the hallway. Its carpet was a rich, purply brown, and it had neat lines from a robot vacuum that had swept its nap into a uniform direction. Is that what they call that? Nap? Adi, he smiled again. I figured out the elevators the day after they stopped the elevator captains. It wasn't hard. On the poor floors, the elevator's infographics only showed the positions of the cars when they were traversing the floors they were allowed to stop at, seeming to vanish between 42 and the penthouse, 35 and the lobby. Here, the infographics showed it all. A car stopped at 37, went up to 38. No resident of the poor floors would waste their time calling an elevator for a single floor's ride. That was the landlords, with special fobs that would summon an elevator directly, even to the poor floors. Now what? She said. She was still making sense of what Adi had done. He showed her the notebook, with tick marks beside every entry. Now we finish your list. 2 more floors to go, 35 and 36. She handed him a sheet, took one herself, and then he summoned another elevator and pressed another fast sequence, then 35 and 36. When the doors opened, he sprinted into the hallway, all recklessness, not even checking to see whether the landlords were waiting for him. She was more careful when the doors opened on 36, peering around the door before stepping into the hall. Then she, too, sprinted for the last door on her list.
Another VM for you. Updates going in next week. That enough time?
Salima tapped her screen and replied, "You are a very bad employee, Wyoming,
I suppose I am.
but you are a good friend."
I suppose I am.
"Thank you, Wy."
Any time.
Salima stretched and stood. She had to go to work now. The ice cream parlor. They were doing a roaring trade now, thanks to an unusually warm spring. They had a new flavor she adored, too. Black olive brittle and goat's cheese, which was the weirdest ice cream she'd ever tasted, but also the best. She collected her cardamom buns and checked her hair in the mirror. The screen buzzed.
Send me the cardamom bun recipe, please.
She did, and left for work. And that was Unauthorized Bread by Cory Doctorow, which is just a nice story about overcoming the adversity of the modern era. Isn't that nice? It's heartwarming. I like it. I like it a lot. Kind of a techno thriller in its way, but it's like, just people living their lives, trying to live their lives, trying not to get evicted. So it's great. It's a human story. It kind of does a good job of explaining this is kind of where technology is trending, and that's very true. God, is it true? Uh, I mean, we're already there. Like this is a near future quote dystopia unquote, but we're basically there. We're sitting in it. Um, so it's there's something there. So next week I'll either do that article. That's not a very long article though. Let's see if I can find that again. I wonder if I can. Did I save it? Where would I have put that? I don't know. I'll have to look for it. Because the article's like it's a longish article, but it's not long enough to take up an entire Wednesday time slot. But I might do it anyway, just so people can see that it's this is a real thing. This is a thing that's happening. This is not some doom saying, oh, it's gonna get so bad, you're not gonna have any control of your No, we're absolutely friggin' there. It just so happens that corporations are the ones that are uh, in the awkward position of having to deal. Well, okay, McDonald's franchisees are the ones that are on the front lines. So it's pretty cool. So I do want to do that one. I'll see if I can find that article again because it was worth reading. Failing that, I'll do the next story in line, which is called Model Minority. And it's got some familiar faces. You'll know what I mean when we get there. It's a cute one. Alrighty, with that, I'm going to scoot. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. If you're tuning in after the fact, hi. There's a reason these are so rough. I do them live. I do them live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, barring some crisis. Um, or work getting in the way, which, happens sometimes, but I've been pretty good about it. I usually start at about 12 noon Eastern Standard Time or East Coast US time. So if you want to tune in live, you can. If you're living on the opposite side of the world, obviously that's not a viable option in all likelihood. Um, but I'm happy that people are listening to these at all. So I'm getting told that this helps people sleep during COVID is maybe the greatest compliment I can possibly have. It makes me overwhelmed with joy. In the next week or so, I'm going to be throwing up a. I'm not going to be throwing up. I hope I don't get sick. I'm going to be attaching to my usual stream description a link to a Patreon. So if people want to throw money my way, they can. I will keep doing these regardless. Getting more Dosh would be nice. Some people have expressed an interest. This is for them. I am not going to mandate it. I'm not going to not do them if people don't throw money my way, because I'm doing this for my own personal enjoyment rather than any financial benefit. If I can get cash out of it too, that's cool too. I don't mind. But realistically, I don't expect that because, you know, times are tough. I don't, I don't expect people to do that for something like this. In fact, I would encourage you not to, probably. Am I saying that I would do it? Probably not. Like, in all honesty, probably wouldn't. But the option will be there for anyone because enough people have said, hey, I'd do it. So why not? But yeah, with that, I'm going to run. Hope people dug it. I know I certainly did. I had gotten the book on a whim out of a. I'd heard about Cory Doctorow before I had gotten it, but I got the book on a whim in a bookstore and was like, Cory Doctorow, this looks fun. It'll be a nice sampling of short stories. Could be entertaining, and rapidly became one of my favorite books because it's just like absolutely nailing the zeitgeist, nailing the spirit of the times. Warren Steele says, I was on the forefront of Android modding back in the day, and this was a blast from the past and is far too real in our future. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. It's great. It's like Cory Doctorow gets it. Like, this is a guy who does absolutely get it. He absolutely gets it. So whenever he's being like very optimistic, I want to believe. I'm just like, man, that's pretty cool. As opposed to Peter Watts, who you could call a pessimist, but I think is probably has the right idea, sadly, regarding how screwed we are environment-wise. Because he reads a lot. He reads more than I do on how screwed we are, and it's looking fairly dire. Fairly dire indeed. Oh, had a fight with it over your cell carrier, but it ended better than you expected. Well, that's good. Reminds me, I don't use a VPN often enough when I'm doing the things that I do. Uh, but my internet provider is too small time, and I'm in a situation where there's enough separation between church and state, so to speak, that I think it would be. They could definitely find out if I was pirating stuff, if they really wanted to, but I think they'd have to care enough to do that. I'd like to say I'm small time, but I'm not even going to tell you about the amount of storage I have taken up. But yeah, it's been fun. Glad anyone could tune in at all. Hopefully people dig it. I know I dig it. I'm repeating myself. I do this. You'll notice I ramble because I don't have a script for these. They are unedited. They are raw and uncut. But yeah, with that, see you all later. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. And you know what? Unauthorized bread is the best tasting bread. So it's good stuff. Alrighty. See you all later. Bye-bye.